Our first company or our first presenter tonight is Joe Camarata, and he is the president and CEO of Quantitative. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, Joe. I know you guys just changed your name, so welcome. You can go ahead and share your screen.
And good evening, everyone. I'm Joe Camarata, President and CEO of Quantitative, formerly Quantitative Radiology Solutions. And as Katie said, we just made the announcement of the name change yesterday, so our slides will still say QRS. But what we're focused on is enabling body-wide analysis of medical images to inform cancer treatment decisions. And I'd like to share with you tonight a first application that we have to improve the accuracy and efficiency of radiation treatment planning. So the problem that we're trying to solve is inefficient contouring of organs at risk. It turns out that about 33% of the patients that receive radiation treatment as part of their cancer treatment have a side effect that warrants an inpatient visit or an inpatient admission or a visit to the emergency room. And when we begin to look at why, we begin to focus on the treatment planning process. There's one step in the treatment planning process. It's called contouring of organs at risk. And here, the dosimetrist or physician will sit down, they'll take their mouse, and they'll go through a CT study and painstakingly outline all of those organs that need to be protected from irradiation. It's a very time-consuming process. In a head and neck case like you see here, it could take 60 to 90 minutes. And it's also a lot of human variability in the process. Now, there are some automatic approaches to doing contouring of organs at risk. In fact, the first one received FDA clearance back in 2010, but they require too much manual editing. They're not widely adopted. And when we talked to physicians about why, what they said is they require so much manual editing, it's easier to just contour manually from the beginning. So we're taking a technology out of the University of Pennsylvania, and the technology is called automatic anatomy recognition. So for radiologists or people familiar with imaging, it's simply image segmentation software. For those of you that aren't as familiar, it is the best way for me to describe it is kind of facial recognition for medical images. So you give us a CT exam, and we go in and we locate all of the anatomical structures that are in that CT exam, and then we analyze them, or in this case, we contour them. So when we've taken this technology and applied it to this problem of OAR contouring, what we have is an approach that's very consistently contours to the medical consensus guidelines, and I'll explain later why that is, extremely robust in that it's able to handle all types of anomalies such as pathologies, streak artifacts, post-surgical manipulations. And we've also built it that it's very flexible. It's on a cloud-based platform, and we're really trying to build it such that it can be accessed from anywhere from in the healthcare system and reduce overall adoption costs. So a little bit more about the technology. We like to call it anatomy-guided deep learning. So first of all, we start out with some proprietary anatomical models and algorithms. And what these models do is they capture the geometrical relationships between the objects in a body region. So you see here on the screen, we have a head and neck case or a head and neck model with all of the anatomical structures represented. It not only captures the geometrical relationships, but it also captures information about how each one of those structures appears on a radiological image, okay? And we use this information in order to localize the structure. So when you give us a case, we'll actually apply the models and the algorithms to localize all of the anatomical structures. It's very, very consistent in terms of its localization. And then we use deep learning in order to produce the contours. Now, a lot of times people will use deep learning and they'll scoop up some existing cases and they'll train their deep learning on those cases. We didn't do that because those cases contain variation and we didn't want the variation. What we did is we actually contoured the cases to the medical consensus guidelines and then had a physician review those contours. And then we trained our system on what we call the ground truths, which were produced to the medical consensus guidelines. This was a very innovative approach and one that we had to share with the FDA in a pre-submission meeting to make sure that they were comfortable with how we were producing the ground truths for our deep learning algorithm. We had the opportunity to evaluate our technology at 4 academic medical centers. And those centers registered or 214 patients on our behalf. And we looked at 3 outcomes. So first of all, in terms of accuracy, we were able to demonstrate that our automatically drawn contours were more accurate and consistent than the current standard of care to medical consensus guidelines. So you see here a so-called box and whisker diagram on the left-hand side of your screen. The blue is the automated automated contours, and the red are the manual contours. The blue is higher than the red, which means it's more accurate, but also the whiskers are narrower, which means it's more consistent in contouring. We also looked at the efficiency, and we were able to demonstrate a time savings of 50 to 70% in OAR contouring when using our technology. And the third outcome was more of a subjective outcome. We simply went back and asked the physicians, how useful are these contours in radiation treatment planning? And in 8 out of the 10 structures, what they told us is that the contours could be used with little or no modifications. So that's a kind of a ringing endorsement in terms of being able to produce contours that require very little or no manual editing, unlike the existing systems. Just a little bit more about where we are and where we're going. So the company was founded in 2013 by the Penn Center for Innovation. We were actually founded by 2 professors from the Department of Radiology at Penn Medicine. I joined the company in 2015, and we started our product development efforts in 2016. We got some SBIR funding from the National Cancer Institute and also the National Science Foundation. We were able to leverage that for some matching funds from a group in Philadelphia called Phase 1 Ventures. After we did our product development, we were able to do a retrospective analysis on over 400 cases from Penn Medicine. Again, we were able to get additional funding from the National Cancer Institute, and then we got more matching funding from Phase 1 Ventures and also brought on another local organization called Ben Franklin Technology Partners. So this was our overall seed round. This Phase 2 funding from the National Cancer Institute was for $2 million, and it allowed us to conduct our clinical evaluation at 4 sites, 3 of them which are shown here on the screen. And that was the evaluation that I showed you on the last slide. Based on the results of that evaluation, we submitted to the FDA at the end of 2020, and in April of this year, we got 510(k) clearance to bring our product into the market in the United States. We also are raising a seed round, and we have a lead investor. Martins and Ventures has signed on as the lead investor for our seed round, and we're looking to close that round sometime this month or next month. So going forward, we'll be bringing our technology into market in targeting radiation therapy centers. We already have another grant from NCI to expand the application to looking at treatment response. So instead of just looking at contouring of organs at risk, we'll be able to start looking at the disease tissue, using that also for contouring, but also being able to look at how it's responding to the treatment. In general, we're participating in a market that's over $500 million just on the U.S. side, and we think that by 2023 we could be EBITDA positive and be funding our future development out of our profits. A little bit about who we are. So I have a background 30 years plus in medical imaging with companies such as Siemens Healthineers and GE Healthcare. Steve Owens, who is on the call with us tonight and will be at the networking session, is the Chief Operating Officer and Chief Technology Officer. Steve and I worked together at Siemens, and then he went off to work in doing medical imaging work in the pharmaceutical industry. We're also joined tonight by Gargi Pednikar, who is our product manager, and she'll be also joining us for the network session. So I think that's the major points that I wanted to make. And with that, I'll close my presentation and be available for questions.
Great, Joe. Thank you so much again for sharing about QRS or Quantitaris tonight. This is exciting stuff. And for those of you that are in our audience, we would love for you to put any questions that you have for Joe and his company in the Q&A function. I want to know a little bit more about, you mentioned there was one clinical study or maybe a couple together that encompassed 214 patients. Do you have more plans for additional clinical studies in the future?
We do, Katie. As a matter of fact, as I mentioned, we are been supported through SBIR grants from the National Cancer Institute. And as part of that, and as part of us completing our Series A round, we're eligible with what's called a Phase 2B grant. And we've spoken to the NCI, our program manager, about this. And what he asked us to do was to look at the clinical outcomes. Now, we showed it operational outcomes, accuracy, efficiency, acceptability.
Right.
But he said, take it to the next step and show the clinical outcomes. Can you demonstrate that you're having a reduction of side effects for cancer patients undergoing radiation therapy? So we'll be applying for that grant next year. It'll probably be about $2 million, and we'll be looking for sites to work on doing that evaluation with us.
That's fantastic. And I agree with your advisors and everything. We need to know what those clinical outcomes are. So that's fantastic. So we have a couple of questions from the audience. Can you provide a little more detail on how your platform fits into the clinical workflows?
So yes, it is I mentioned it before, it's a cloud-based platform. And it works, you simply upload DICOM images to it, and then we give you the results back. So there is no user interface per se. It's completely automated, the segmentation or contouring. So a person can upload a DICOM image to us, and we'll return what's called the DICOM RT structures, which will go into the treatment planning system. And this way, the physician or dosimetrist is working in their treatment planning system to make whatever modifications. Right now, the upload and download are actually manual steps, but in the next product release, we'll be automating that.
Great. And we have a few questions about your business plan. So tell us a little bit more about your business plan, your go-to-market strategy, some questions around, is it a one-time purchase or a SaaS product? What's the price point, et cetera? Okay,
so being cloud-based, it is a SaaS product. And we think that using a SaaS-based agreement gives us some flexibility on the pricing side. So for example, I mentioned to you that head and neck were the most challenging cases. So we can actually start an institution by just, at a reasonable price point focusing on their head and neck cases. And as they become comfortable with the technology, move that to lung, move that to prostate, and continue to grow in that. I think, in terms of large institutions, large enterprise institutions, it's probably going to be about $150,000 a year in terms of the annual subscription. And we have ROI data, which shows that that's backed up just by personnel savings in terms of that. So right now we're in market. We've been targeting the proton centers. There's 36 proton centers in the United States. And because they have the highest need for more accurate planning and more efficient planning, so they can replan during the course of treatment. So we've been in discussions with those. But our big launch is actually going to happen at ASTRO. ASTRO happens at McCormick Center in Chicago next month, and we'll be exhibiting in ASTRO.
Great. And one other question from our audience. And this goes, I think, to your cost savings, I would say. What kind of absolute time savings are you seeing per study?
So coming back to what we showed in the clinical evaluation, it was about 50 to 70%. So if you look at, if you look at a head and neck study that was an hour to an hour and a half long, it's about 45 to 50 minutes. In our clinical evaluation, for example, in the thoracic studies, it was taking about 40 to 45 minutes to contour those manually. And, we were able to show, 15 to 20 minutes in terms of doing the editing on the automatic contours.
Great. And one last question. I hear you talking about, so starting with head and neck, moving on clearly to other parts of the body. Do you see additional future use cases for this technology?
We do, as I mentioned. So the underlying technology, the automatic anatomy recognition, it really is a platform. And what makes it unique is its ability to localize structures very precisely. And once you can localize a structure, you can do an analysis. We're doing contouring on it now, but I mentioned we're also starting to localize lesions that are within structures. And then we're applying the technology in our second NCI grant to PET CT, and then being able to look at quantifying the amount of disease that's in an anatomical structure or organ or body region. Once we're able to quantify that, we can begin to use it for treatment response. So that's one of the other examples. We also have some work that we're doing and looking at body composition analysis. So you can look at the volume of skeletal mass or muscle or fat.
Sure. Interesting. All right, Joe, thank you so much for being with us tonight. I realize we did not quite get to all of our questions, but Joe's going to stick around for our networking time after all the pitches have completed. Thank you so much again for being here.